well. All there together.
Well, absolutely, and President Trump has sort of set something of a standard at meetings of global leaders, tending to be one of the last to arrive and sometimes late in for meetings. But it was President Putin who was the last to turn up here, perhaps for the French concerns because of that security breach during President Trump's arrival. Perhaps there's concerns generally more broadly for the services protecting, U.S. services protecting President Trump, the Russian services protecting Vladimir Putin as well, that in the past week there had been arrests in France for uncovering a plot that was a threat to President Macron himself. So all of these things in play, but I think at these moments, who arrived when, where they stand, it's all set aside, deeply embedded in protocol, but all set aside for this moment of solemn remembrance. We're expecting to hear the last post to be played. We're expecting to hear speeches from high school students here read. We're expecting some very poignant recollections from diaries of officers of different armies who were in the trenches right in those moments and days leading up to and at the time that the armistice was signed and the ceasefire was announced. And for anyone that's ever visited those cemeteries in the fields of France and Belgium and so many other parts of Europe, this sort of service that we're witnessing now is only part of the picture. Those huge fields that are laid out with so many young men of their generations, 8 million who died in the war. Any moment one visits them is poignant. This sums it all up, brings these leaders together. But it is a huge act of remembrance that we all endeavor to pursue at this time, to remember the sacrifice, to remember what led to this, what came after, and the importance of avoiding wars on this scale again.
Silence. I believe we're now hearing the minute of silence in honor of those who have fallen during World War I, and we will honor that. Just heard the French national anthem there, La Marseillaise, being sung by the choir of the French army. And Emmanuel Macron will soon be completing this introductory part of the commemorative ceremony and taking his place among the 72 world leaders that are gathered under the Arc de Triomphe.
And we were just hearing, of course, the names of the soldiers that they've lost this year fighting for France. And we saw their pictures up on the screen. We might mention that the last veteran from World War I died in 2012. So we are seeing veterans from other wars here.
We have Kate Williams with us. She's a lecturer at the University of London, specializing in modern history. And Kate, allow me if I have to interrupt you at some point as we watch these live pictures. But it's now 11:30 a.m. in France. That means we are exactly 100 years and 30 minutes after the official time date of the armistice, the end of the fighting of World War I. Explain to us Explain to us the moments that led up to that moment. What was it like at 10 a.m. and what was it like at 11:01?
It's an incredible story. So the actual agreement, the armistice itself, was signed at 5 a.m. Paris time between the Germans and the Allies. And then during that period after that, there was getting the news out to the people across the world. And the news did go out very slowly to people on the Western Front. But actually the fighting continued between 5 a.m. and 11 a.m. on this day 100 years ago. And indeed, the last soldier to be killed was an American soldier who was killed at 10:59, 1 minute before the armistice took its effect. And there was a British Commonwealth soldier, a Canadian soldier, killed at 10:58 by a German sniper. So the fighting did continue right up until the moment of 11 a.m. And then the guns, the bombs, everything fell silent. And there was a real contrast because in the civilian cities, in the cities across Europe, in the cities across the world, there was an absolute outpouring of joy, euphoria. People couldn't believe it. They were so thrilled. They poured into the streets, singing and dancing. But where the men were fighting, it was almost as if they could barely believe it. They were emotionally drained. They were shocked. They couldn't actually understand that you could stand up and not be shot at. They did talk to the Germans. They shook each other's hands. There were celebrations. But they were quite mooted because these soldiers, they'd seen so much, they'd lost so much, and they also saw what a huge job it would be to rebuild this shattered world of Europe once more.
And on those words, Kate, we're going to listen in.
This is Yo-Yo Ma. We're listening to Yo-Yo Ma play a somber Bach for the people gathered there. And he sits right there in front of the eternal flame, representing the unknown soldier. Let's bring in now CNN's Jim Acosta. He joins us now via Skype to talk more, Jim, about the poignancy of this as we look at President Trump next to Angela Merkel, next to the French president.
Yes. Yes, Natalie, it is a stirring scene to watch. And I have to say, when you see these three leaders sitting together, you can't help but think about just the way the geopolitical stage is shifting at this very moment. As we're marking the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, you have to look at the various political dimensions that are just sort of unfolding in front of us. Angela Merkel, who is not going to be running for re-election as the German chancellor, she's weakened politically, raising all sorts of questions as to who is going to rise as potentially the de facto leader of Europe. A lot of people are saying that might be the French President Emmanuel Macron. And as we saw yesterday here in Paris, the body language being a little frostier between President Trump and President Macron.
Jim, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Jim, I'm going to interrupt you for a second as we want to take the sights and sounds. And right now, high schoolers, French high schoolers are going to be reading excerpts from letters written by people who were on the ground on November 11th when they heard and learned the news that the fighting was over.
Dans leur carnet et leur correspondance, les femmes et les hommes, à l'arrière comme au front, témoignent de ce jour.
Adjudant Roumiguière, soldat français du 243e régiment. 7 novembre 1918.
Est-ce que je rêve? Le bruit court avec persistance. Est-il vrai qu'à l'heure qu'il est, l'armistice avec l'Allemagne a été
So what we're hearing is high school students in France who are going to be reading excerpts from letters written mostly by soldiers, and it is what they wrote in the run-up to the armistice. I believe we now have the translation.
Both victims of the war and my eyes filled with tears. Friday, the 8th of November. Yesterday, I thought that the war was a long-forgotten nightmare. I now realize that I was deluding myself. The war will continue. Shots will be fired and more blood will be shed. 11th of November 1918. More than ever, I'm convinced that the war has at long last ended. The arms have been cast aside. They will not be taken up again. I have much that I want to write, but the low rumbling of the cooking pots and the whistling of the bullets is finished. It's over.
Testimony of a British soldier, Charles Neville, artillery officer.
My darling parents, today has been perfectly wonderful. We got news of the armistice at 9:30 this morning. I got 10 minutes to sort out the detachment for Grand Parade in the Square of Mons. So I got everybody I could let my hands on to scrub the mud off. The streets were packed with wildly cheering civilians, tracking flowers up and carry on only like a foreigner can. All the streets and the square was a blaze of color, mostly, of course, the Belgian colors, red, yellow, and black, Union Jacks, French flags, American flags, in fact, every conceivable flag of the Allies.
Travailleur chinois de 23 ans, Ku Ching-chin, traducteur. Témoignage écrit depuis un dépôt de Rouen.
忽闻教堂钟声，工厂汽笛声，以及场外欢呼声。
Les sirènes des usines se mirent à rugir et des cris et des chants.
使之休战条约一
So you have high schoolers here reading excerpts of letters that were written by soldiers who were on the front at the moment when they learned of the armistice. These are their impressions, their thoughts and feelings as they wrote back to their families. This is a letter that was written by a Chinese national who was in France in the western French region of Normandy at the time. And I'll tell you, as somebody who lived in France, I'm not at all surprised that the youth and high schoolers and teenagers would be so heavily involved in this commemorative ceremony, because this is a very important theme that the French authorities are going to want to push through and push across, which is the generational aspect of it and the lessons that the current generations need to learn from World War I and also from World War II. There's a heavy emphasis put on this in France at all levels. CNN senior international correspondent Jim Bitterman, who's been living in France for decades, I believe now, Jim, can tell us about this. Jim, would you agree with me that the French authorities, for them it is key that everybody, especially new generations, learn the lessons of the past?
Absolutely, Cyril. In fact, I mean, that was one of the themes this week as President Macron did his itinérance, as he called it, the kind of wandering through the battlefields. One of the points of that was to pass along to another generation the conflicts, the catastrophe that are brought on by conflict, and to get young people to understand a little bit about what happened back then and why it shouldn't be repeated. I know you mentioned, we were talking earlier about my little village in Normandy, and in fact, the parents out there every 11th of November urge their children to come out, and they look bored and they don't want to be there and they'd rather do something else. But the fact is that parents bring them out and make sure that they're witness to this ceremony on the 11th of November, because it is so moving and also so much to remember.
Jim, let me interrupt you for a second, Jim.
It's devastating.
Jim, let me interrupt you for a second as we continue to listen to the music being played. Now it's French cellist Renaud Capuçon alongside Yo-Yo Ma.
testimony of an American soldier, Captain Charles Normington, 127th Infantry, 32nd Division, November 11, 1918.
In the parade were hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the US, England, Canada, France, Australia, Italy, and the colonies. Each soldier had his arms full of French girls, some crying, others laughing. Each girl had to kiss every soldier before she would let him pass. There is nowhere on earth I would rather be today than just where I am. I have had many an old French couple come up to me, crying like children, saying, "You grand Americans, you have done this for us?" I only hope the soldiers who died for this cause are looking down upon the world today. The whole world owes this moment of real joy to the heroes who are not here to help enjoy it.
Eric Maria Remarque, deutscher Soldat.
Eric Maria Remarque.
Let's go back to Jim Bitterman, who is just down the road from where this is happening. He's on the Champs-Élysées, and Jim's been our Paris correspondent for decades now. Jim, just give me your thoughts and impressions as you watch this.
Once we leave, it will be forever.
Well, I'm very moved by it all. I think that one of the things that this does is it brings out the international quality of not only the war, but of France today and of the world today. The war itself brought in so many different nationalities. I just read this morning there was a note from the Indian press service reminding us that 1.5 million Indians were involved in the war. It's something that was left out of my history books. But in any case, watching this exercise in memory, I think is just fascinating, and I think it's like a history lesson that Emmanuel Macron is wanting to give to the world, and I think he's succeeding. As we see Donald Trump listening there in the front row, and of course all the other leaders as well. I suppose around the world are watching CNN and learning a little bit about World War I and the significance of it.
Yeah, and that particular reading may have been a particular interest to Donald Trump, since it was a letter written by an American soldier being thanked by the French. Let's listen in.
Testimony from a French person. A letter to her fiancé, Pierre Fort, from Denise Brûleur. My darling Pierre, at the very instant when I write to you, in your distant forests of Alsace, you are learning the extraordinary news. The bells here of the churches are ringing out. I'm overwhelmed by happiness. I cannot write. I'm sobbing for joy. I will never, ever be able to convey the emotion and the extraordinary enthusiasm during this first day of armistice. We are overwhelmed, and this extraordinary thought that not a single man will fall henceforth, that the vast expanse of the front is silent. There is nothing but silence.
De grosses larmes. En songeant que
big tears as we reflect that everything is over.
The queen of African music, Angelique Kidjo, singing Blewu. And this just helps to underscore the international nature of this war. There were numerous soldiers from Africa, from North Africa, from West Africa. Remember, at the time, the countries involved in this war, many of them were empires. France had colonies across the world, including many of them in Africa.
We're about to hear now from the leader of France, Emmanuel Macron. A very, very important event for this president.
Please bear with the interpreters as we try and figure out a technical problem. We're not getting the sound. Technical hitch.
Le 7 novembre 1918,
On 7th of November 1918,
lorsque le caporal Clairon
when
Pierre
bugle player
Sellier
Corporal Pierre Sellier
sonna le premier
sounded the initial ceasefire
vers 10 heures du matin,
at around 10 o'clock in the morning,
bien des hommes ne purent y croire.
many soldiers could
sortirent
not believe
lentement de leur
it. Then
position,
they slowly
pendant que
left
de loin
their
en loin,
positions,
sur les lignes,
and further away
les mêmes
along
clairons répétaient
the
le
front
cessez-le-feu.
lines, the same
Puis
bugles
faisaient
repeated
entendre
the
les notes de la
ceasefire
sonnerie aux morts,
and then sounded the
avant que
last
les cloches
post
ne répandent la nouvelle.
before the
à la
bells spread
tout le
the news across the entire country.
Le 11 novembre 1918,
November 11th,
11 heures du
1918,
matin,
at 11 in the morning,
il y a 100 ans,
100 years ago,
jour pour jour,
day
heure pour heure,
on the day, on the
à
hour,
Paris comme dans toute la
in
France,
Paris and
les clairons
all around
retentirent,
France, the
et les
bugles
cloches de toutes les églises ont sonné.
sounded and the bells pealed.
C'était l'armistice.
Armistice was being announced.
C'était la fin
This
de 4
was
longues
the
et terribles années de
end of
combats
4
meurtriers.
long, terrible deaths and
L'armistice,
fighting,
pourtant, n'était pas la paix.
but armistice
Et à l'Est,
did not signify
pendant
peace.
plusieurs années,
And
d'effroyables
in the
guerres.
East, for many years, devastating wars continued to be
Ici,
fought.
Ce même jour,
Here,
les
on this
Français et
very
leurs
day,
alliés
the
ont
French and their
célébré leur
allies
victoire.
celebrated their victory.
Ils s'étaient battus pour leur patrie
They had
et
fought
pour la liberté.
for their homeland and for their
Ils avaient
freedom.
consenti pour cela tous les
And
sacrifices
for this, they
et
had
toutes
made
les
huge
souffrances.
sacrifices and suffered untold
Ils avaient connu
hardships.
un enfer
They had experienced a
que
hell,
nul ne peut se
a hell that
représenter.
no one can imagine.
Nous devrions prendre un instant
We
pour
should
faire
take a
revenir à nous
moment
cet immense cortège de
to bring back
combattants
into our memory
où défilent
all
des
these
soldats de la
fighters,
métropole et de l'Empire,
French soldiers from
des
the continent
légionnaires
and
et
the
des
colonies,
garibaldiens, avec des
around the
étrangers
world.
venus du monde entier, parce que la France représentait pour eux tout ce qu'il y avait de
fighters
beau
from
dans le
the
monde.
Legion, foreigners
Avec les
that had
ombres
come
de
from
Peugeot,
the whole world,
premier
because
tombé,
for them,
et de
France symbolized
Trébuchon,
all that was
dernier mort pour
beautiful
la
in the
France,
world.
10 minutes avant l'armistice.
Let us summon the
Voici
ghosts of
l'instituteur
Peugeot, the
Kleber
first to have fallen, and Trébuchon, the
défenseur de
last who
Beaumont,
died for France 10 minutes before the
Blaise
armistice.
Sandra,
We
le
have
régiment de
teacher
marche de la
Kleber
Légion
Dupuis, defender of Douaumont,
les soldats des
Guillaume
régiments
Apollinaire,
basques,
Blaise
bretons,
Sandra
marseillais,
from the
le
infantry of the
capitaine
Foreign
de Gaulle,
Legion,
que personne
the
n'avait
soldiers
reconnu,
from the regiments of the
Julien
Basque
Green,
country,
l'Américain,
Brittany or
à la
Marseille,
porte
the
de son
Captain de Gaulle
ambulance,
that was unknown at the time,
Monterland
Julien Green, the
et
American
Giono,
with his ambulance, Monterland Giono,
Péguy, Alain
Charles
Fournier,
Péguy and
tombés
Alain
dans les
Fournier,
premières semaines.
who
Joseph
all fell
Kessel,
during the first
venu de
weeks.
Orenbourg, en
Joseph
Russie,
Kessel, who came from Orenburg in Russia,
et tous les autres,
and all the others, all the others
qui sont les
who are
nôtres,
our family,
auxquels plutôt nous appartenons,
the family that
et
we
dont on peut
belong
lire
to
les noms
today,
sur chaque monument,
the names of whom
des hauteurs
can be
solaires de
read
la
off
Corse
each
aux vallées
monument,
des Alpes,
from the
de la
sun-kissed
Sologne
mountains
au
of
Vosges,
Corsica
de la
to the
Pointe du
valleys
Raz
of
à
the
la frontière
Alps,
espagnole.
from the Sologne
Oui,
to the Vosges,
une
from the
seule
Pointe du Raz to
France,
the
rurale et
Spanish border,
urbaine, bourgeoise,
one
aristocratique
France,
et
rural,
populaire,
urban,
de
bourgeois,
toutes les couleurs,
aristocratic,
où le curé et
working class were
l'anticlérical ont
all the
souffert
colors,
côte à côte,
and
et dont
where the
l'héroïsme et
parish
la
priest and the
douleur
secularists
nous ont
suffered side by side, and whose
Durant ces
pain
4
shaped
années,
us during these 4
l'Europe
years
manqua de se suicider.
of fighting. Europe nearly committed
L'humanité
suicide.
s'était enfoncée dans le
Humankind
labyrinthe hideux
had gone down the sinister path of merciless fighting,
dans un enfer qui
the
engloutit
kind of
tous les
hell that
combattants,
devours all
de
fighters,
quelque côté qu'ils soient,
whatever side they might be
quelque
on,
nationalité
whatever
qu'ils
country they hail from.
Dès le lendemain,
the day after the armistice,
dès le lendemain de l'armistice, commença
the very next
le
day after the
funèbre
armistice,
décompte
the
des morts,
sinister task of
des
counting
blessés,
the deaths,
des mutilés,
counting the dead, the wounded,
des disparus.
the disfigured, the missing started.
Ici, en France,
Here in
mais
France,
aussi dans chaque pays,
but
les
also
familles pendant des
in
mois
all the other belligerent countries,
attendirent en vain
families
le
waited
retour
for
d'un
months
père,
on end in
d'un
vain the
frère,
return of a father,
d'un
a
mari,
brother, a husband, a
Et
fiancé,
parmi ces absents,
and amongst
il y eut
those
aussi ces femmes
that were
admirables,
absent, there were
engagées auprès des
also
combattants.
admirable women who worked alongside the soldiers as volunteers.
10 millions de morts,
10 million dead,
6 millions de blessés et mutilés,
6 million wounded,
3 millions de veuves,
3 million widows,
6 millions d'orphelins,
6 million orphans,
des millions de victimes
millions
civiles,
of civilian
1
victims,
milliard d'obus
1
tirés sur le
billion
seul sol de
shells dropped
France.
on France only.
Le monde
The
découvrit
world
l'ampleur de
discovered the
blessures que
extent
l'ardeur
of the
combattante
wounds
avait
that
occultées.
combatant fervor had obscured.
Aux larmes des mourants
The
succédèrent
tears of the dying
des survivants.
were followed by those of the survivors.
Car sur ce sol de France,
Because on
le monde
this
entier
very soil
était
in
venu
France,
combattre.
the entire world
Des
had
jeunes
come
hommes de
to
toutes les
fight.
provinces et de
Young
l'outre-mer,
men from
des
French
jeunes hommes
provinces,
venus
from
d'Afrique,
overseas
du
territories,
Pacifique,
young men
des
hailing
Amériques,
from
et
Africa,
d'Asie,
the
sont
Pacific,
venus mourir
the
loin de leur
Americas,
famille, dans des
Asia, came
villages
to
dont ils
die
ne
far
connaissaient
from
pas
their
même le
families in
nom.
villages of which they did not even know the name.
Les millions de témoins
The millions of
toutes les
witnesses
nations
from all nations
racontèrent l'horreur des
then
combats,
told
la
of the
puanteur
horrific
des
fighting,
tranchées,
the stench of the
la
trenches,
désolation des champs de
the
bataille,
bleakness
les
of the
cris des blessés dans
battlefields,
la
the
nuit,
screams of the
la
wounded in the
destruction de
night,
campagnes
the
florissantes
the
où ne
destruction
subsistait
wrought
plus
on
que
the
la
fields in
silhouette
bloom,
calcinée des arbres.
which were reduced to a cinder.
Beaucoup de ceux qui sont rentrés
Many of those who went
perdu
home,
leur
who
jeunesse,
made it home, had lost
leurs
their
idéaux,
youth, their dreams,
leur goût de vivre.
their appetite for life.
Beaucoup étaient défigurés,
Many went home
aveugles,
disfigured, blind,
amputés.
amputated.
Vainqueurs et vaincus
Victors and
furent
vanquished
alors plongés pour longtemps
were then
dans le
plunged
même deuil.
for a long time in the same darkness.
1918,
1918,
c'était il y a 100 ans.
that was 100 years ago.
Cela semble loin,
It seems very far away,
et pourtant c'était hier.
but it was only yesterday.
J'ai arpenté les terres de France où
I
se
have
sont déroulés les
seen the
combats les plus
countryside where
J'ai
the
vu dans ces campagnes de
most
mon
terrible
pays
battles were
la terre
fought.
encore grise et toujours
And
stérile des champs de
in that
bataille,
countryside, I saw the land still
J'ai vu les
grey
villages
and barren
détruits,
from the fighting.
qui n'avaient plus
I
d'habitants
saw
pour les
villages
reconstruire,
destroyed with no one
et
left
qui ne sont
alive to
aujourd'hui
rebuild them,
encore que le
and
témoignage
whose ruins
pierre sur
still today
pierre
attest
de la
to the
folie des
folly
hommes.
of mankind.
J'ai vu
I saw
sur nos
on
monuments
our monuments
la litanie des noms
the
de Français
litany
côtoyant les noms
of
des
names
étrangers
of French
morts sous le
soldiers
soleil de France.
alongside the names of
J'ai vu le
foreign
corps de nos
soldiers who
soldats
died
ensevelis
under the skies of
sous une
France.
nature
I saw the
redevenue
bodies of our
innocente.
soldiers buried in the fields where nature
Comme j'avais
has
vu dans les
reclaimed
fosses
its
communes
rights.
se mêler
Just
les
as I had
ossements
seen
des
in mass
soldats
graves,
allemands
side by
et des
side, the
soldats
bones of
français,
German and French
côte à
soldiers
côte,
who had,
qui par un hiver
soldiers
glacial
who had fought
s'étaient
during a
entretués pour
vicious
quelques mètres de
winter
terrain.
over a few square yards of soil.
Les traces de cette guerre
The traces
ne
of
se
that
sont
war
jamais effacées.
never
Ni sur les terres
faded,
de
have not
France,
faded from
ni sur
French
celles
soil.
d'Europe
They
et du
have
Moyen-Orient,
not faded from
ni
Europe,
dans la
from the
mémoire
Middle
des
East,
hommes
nor
partout dans
from
le
our
monde.
memories, all of us around the world.
Souvenons-nous,
Let us remember.
n'oublions pas,
Let us not
car le
forget.
souvenir de ces sacrifices nous
Because
exhorte
the
à être
remembrance
dignes
of
de
these
ceux qui sont morts
sacrifices
pour nous,
urges us to
pour
be
que nous
worthy
puissions
of those
vivre
that
libres.
died for us, so that we may live free.
Ne
Let us
retranchons rien
remember.
de ce qu'il y avait de
Let us
pureté,
take away
d'idéal,
nothing of what was
de
pure,
principes
of the
supérieurs
ideals,
dans le
of the lofty
patriotisme de nos
principles
aînés.
of our elders'
Cette
patriotism.
vision de la France
This
comme
vision
nation
of
généreuse,
France as a
de la France
generous
comme
nation,
projet,
of
de
France
la
as a
France porteuse
project,
de valeurs
as France,
universelles,
the bearer of
a
universal
été dans ces heures
values,
sombres
was
exactement le
displayed
contraire
during
de
these dark
l'égoïsme d'un
hours
peuple qui ne regarde
as the
que ses
very opposite of
intérêts.
the selfishness of a nation which
Car
only
le
looks after its
patriotisme
own interests,
est
because
l'exact
patriotism
contraire
is the
du
exact
nationalisme.
opposite of nationalism.
Le nationalisme en est la
Nationalism
trahison.
is a betrayal of patriotism by saying, our interests first, who cares about the others? We erase what a nation holds dearest, what gives it life, what makes it great, and what is essential, its moral values. Let us remember, we in France, what Jacques Clemenceau proclaimed on the day of victory 100 years ago to this day before the National Assembly, after which members of the Parliament started chanting the French national anthem. He said, France, fighting for rights and lawfulness, fighting for freedom, France shall always and forever be the soldier defending aspirations. Those are the values, those are the virtues.
You are watching and listening to French President Macron here, Emmanuel Macron, speaking to the French people, the people of the world, and to dozens of world leaders here marking the 100th year since the armistice there in World War I, the end of the war. We will, throughout the morning, show you more, bring you more of the live events from Paris as the world marks this very solemn occasion.
Be allowing the past to be forgotten.
I just can't believe it. It really looks like a war zone.
Fast-moving wildfires wreaking havoc in California.
A whole town was wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of 8 hours.
A source familiar with the president's interactions with other European leaders here in Paris says he has been testy at times.
President Macron seemed pretty satisfied with his talks with Donald Trump.
I'm not the one to comment his tweets. I always prefer having direct discussion or answering questions.
The Florida Secretary of State has ordered statewide machine recounts for 3 races.
President Trump accuses Democrats of trying to, quote, steal this election.
Have I shown you my cute mug? It says, it's not about hatred, it's about heritage. And then inside is a second secret mug that says, JK, it is about hatred.
This is New Day Weekend with Victor Blackwell and Christy Pohl.
So grateful to have you with us on this Sunday as we watch President Trump and world leaders in France right now marking 100 years since the end of World War I.
More live pictures here for you right now from Paris. This again is President Emmanuel Macron, and these are the Armistice Day services happening right now. Millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives between 1914 and 1918 to be what became known as the Great War. Among the dead, 117,000 Americans. Later this morning, President Trump, he's scheduled to deliver remarks at a cemetery outside of Paris where some of America's fallen soldiers were laid to rest. This comes a day after he canceled a planned trip to another ceremony. The president's chief of staff, John Kelly, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joe Dunford, laid a wreath there instead. You're seeing some video from yesterday where that happened. The White House says rain grounded the president's helicopter, Marine One. And the president's visit to Paris is not without a bit of controversy today.
Yeah, take a look at what happened just last hour. Can you see there? We've highlighted it for you. There is a protester who is topless with the words "fake peacemaker" on her chest. She jumped the barricades, dashed toward the president's motorcade. Obviously, you can tell how close she got. She was tackled by police. But this, moments before, take a look at this scene. I mean, this is significant. There's a wall of world leaders marching together in the rain with their umbrellas down the boulevard in a show of solidarity. Here's the thing. You don't see the president there. He arrived shortly after this happened. He was absent from this moment. Apparently, he chose not to ride the bus with the rest of them, but to take his own private motorcade. From Paris now, CNN White House correspondent Caitlin Collins and CNN's chief White House correspondent Jim Acosta. Jim, about 50 yards from that commemoration ceremony that's taking place right now. Caitlin, I want to start with you. Do we know why the president chose to arrive separately?
Well, that was likely a security concern. They didn't want to put President Trump on a bus with dozens of other world leaders as it made its way down the Champs-Élysées today, but also because President Trump was not with those world leaders beforehand. Instead, he came straight to this ceremony from the ambassador's residence where he has been staying and rode in the Beast, as you just showed, coming down this street here on his way. And that is when that protester jumped over those barricades and got very close, closer than I've ever seen anyone get to the Beast before in some kind of demonstration, whether she was protesting President Trump or protesting this overall, before she was tackled and apprehended by French security officials. Now then, you did see it was a striking image to see all of those world leaders, the Canadian Prime Minister, the French President, the German Chancellor, all making their way to this ceremony, all side by side, but no President Trump, because he had already arrived and was waiting in the wings for them to make their way to the stage. Another leader who did similar was the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who came up after President Trump had already gotten on stage with the First Lady Melania Trump and shook hands and then took his stage over by the French president's wife. Now, all of this comes as there has been criticism for the White House since they scrapped President Trump's visit yesterday to a cemetery where he's supposed to visit the dead soldiers who are buried there, dead American soldiers. But White House officials are now voicing confidence that that criticism will dissipate after this ceremony ends today and President Trump does go to the Surin American Cemetery, where he's going to not only lay a wreath but deliver his first formal remarks of the trip.
All right, Caitlin Collins, we appreciate it so much. Thank you.
All right, joining us now, CNN political analyst. Actually, we go to Jim Acosta first, right? We've got Jim Acosta, who's about 50 yards from this ceremony. Jim, give us an idea of what is happening now that the president is participating in while listening to Emmanuel Macron here.
Hi, guys. I don't know if you can hear me, but yes, we are just 50 yards from the Arc de Triomphe, where President Trump is sitting with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and listening to the French President Emmanuel Macron speak right now to mark this Armistice Day, the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. This is a solemn occasion, obviously, marking what was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. Of course, that didn't happen. And I think what you're hearing from the French president this morning and what we've been hearing from French officials all week is sort of